Uh, Thank you, Honorable Chair. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning or afternoon wherever you are. All right. Thank you for coming to the fourth in our series of webinars here at SEARCCT. And today, my presentation is going to be about engaging and partnering in preventing and countering violent extremism. I'll just put up my slides here. All right. Okay. So when you are thinking about terrorism, one of the things that you have to consider is the communicative dimension, because essentially, I believe actually, and some people may argue the same, that terrorism is at its heart a communicative act. It's an action designed to deliver a message. Because when you consider it, how would you say, terrorist acts themselves, with all due respect to the victims of terrorism who have suffered at their hands, but as acts themselves, they do not cause as much as damage or loss of life as when you consider other forms of conflict. But when terrorists act, when they do violence, it is actually to communicate a message. Now you can consider the communicative dimensions to the various target audiences that they have. For example, to the target populace, they might be saying that this will eventually happen to you unless you convince your government to do otherwise. And to their supporters, they are saying that we are defending your values, we are defending what you believe in. And to their potential recruits, they are communicating the fact that they are a very interesting organization that they might consider joining, and that they are offering you an opportunity for you to be part of something very meaningful. And to everybody else, perhaps their messaging is that do not get involved, do not interfere with what we are doing. So there are various target audiences that terrorists are communicating with through their actions and through the violence and the brutality that they are inflicting. They are actually delivering a particular message. You sometimes see this in, how would you say, movies where the villain says, I want you to deliver a message. This is similar to what terrorists are doing. By their actions themselves, they are delivering a message. Now, communications is the most significant technology for terrorism and violent extremism because it allows messaging to the target audience, and it is becoming even more direct as we have developments in communications technology. The development of mass media in the 1950s and 1960s, for example, allowed terrorists to gain publicity and coverage outside of their local domain. And they can even, how would you say, get their message across globally in a matter of minutes. It depends on how fast their news travels, all right? But the communications during this period in 550s, 60s, and 70s is still limited because it is mediated. There are still, how would you say, what we call gatekeepers, authorities that could censor the reporting on the terrorist acts, and even news directors who may ethically decide that not to air the demands of terrorists in order to limit their effectiveness. But with the rise of the internet and social media, terrorists are now able to circumvent these gatekeepers and to scale up their unmediated communications to target audiences. So in effect, how would you say, they are able to take the violence of the battlefield, as we saw in the propaganda that we see from groups like ISIS. They are able to take the violence and the visceral nature of the battlefield and put it to the fingertips, where it is very difficult to regulate what people see on social media. People will try to censor, people will try to regulate, but it is extremely difficult in this age of social media to effectively regulate the content that goes. And this is sort of heaven sent for violent extremists, because they are able to bypass any potential gatekeepers that can prevent their message from getting through. Now, terrorists are no longer solely dependent on face-to-face efforts to recruit these days due to the platforms of social media. Not to say that radicalization occurs without any face-to-face contact, but the heavy lifting is now done by social media platforms that allow for terrorists to be in intimate contact to those that they might be interested in recruiting. And this has led to this very worrying phenomenon of the foreign terrorist fighters, in which we saw in the civil war in Syria, where around 40,000 people from all over the world were recruited to fight in a war far away from their own lands, all right? And terrorists these days and violent extremists these days learn how to use the imagery, the motifs that resonates well with young people. For example, in the picture here, we have a picture of the very popular game Call of Duty, right? The Black Ops game, and some of the ISIS recruiters in Indonesia has managed to transform this into a call of jihad in order to attract those who might be interested in gaming and have the message resonate with them. Now, a study during between 2014 and 2015, the social media campaigns of groups like ISIS, apparently up to 15% of the messaging actually reference games and Western movies in order to excite young people into considering joining forces with this group and being recruited into this group. Now, in our many talks with young people, ever since SEARCCT has been established in 2003, we have gone to many universities. We talked to a lot of thousands of young people in universities, and we find that a lot of them are very passionate and very eager to use their energy for what they see is good. All right. Now, terrorists are able to tap into this passion and pervert it into joining their cause, in the sense, for example, talking about how the people oppressed in certain regions need their help, and they are offering them a way in order to do something while the governments of the world are not doing anything. Now, this is something that we see happening because of the ability of terrorists and violent extremists these days to tell effective stories, or what we like to call narratives, all right? We'll go on to the next one. Now, the social media war. Now, I remember back in 2015, if I was not mistaken, I was having a discussion with some experts. We had some experts from the UK and the US coming over, and we talked about it, and they were talking about terrorists using images like Nutella and kittens. I was wondering why were they using this at this time? Why were we even discussing this? But apparently this is part of the branding that, groups like ISIS are able to develop. They know how to create certain images and associate their group with certain images that triggers people into certain emotional states that makes them more susceptible, that makes them eager to join the cause. For example, as you can see in the pictures there, people holding up Nutella and posting pictures of kittens. These are actual postings from violent extremists, members of violent extremist groups, trying to persuade young people that life where they are, where they have gone to, these foreign terrorist fighters, is not so bad, because even when you go there, you still have Nutella, and the images of kittens are used to humanize them, to make them appear more friendly than what they are actually in essence. And these groups are very agile and innovative. For example, they are able to use drones in order to show you a very real and visceral image of what happens in the battlefield in a way that nobody has been able to do before that. So you do not have to move away from the comfort of your homes in order to feel what it is like to be in a battlefield. And it gets you young people very excited when they see some of these images. Maybe they're interested in joining them themselves. And they are also good at crowdsourcing. Now, what we've been calling as the ISIS fanboys and fangirls, they are not actually members of these groups, but they are passionate people who work day and night to produce propaganda material for the group itself. So in essence, the group doesn't have to do much compared to the things that they have been outsourcing to their people. And they are able to tell very powerful stories, as I mentioned, the narratives that they have been coming out with. So for example, being from Malaysia, I still remember the stories that my mother used to tell me. If you know the story of Si Tanggang, right? Si Tanggang is about a young man who defies his mother and then was eventually cursed and turned to stone. Now, I was 4 or 5 years old when I heard that story, but until today, the values that I learned from the stories teaches me not to go against my parents, for example. It has far-reaching implications. And because stories are so common, people are taking them for granted, but actually stories are very powerful drivers of behavior. And we have to think of it in this mindset that part of the weapon that most violent extremists and terrorist groups are using are stories, and they are using this to powerful effect. Recognizing this, for example, the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2354 in 2017 actually is known as the Countering the Narratives of Violent Extremism resolution, I believe. It states that the efforts to counter terrorist narratives can benefit with the engagement with actors including youth, families, women, religious authorities, cultural and educational leaders, and other, groups of civil society. So the idea here is that you need to start working and tapping into all these various groups in order to come up with messages that resonate, that really reach out to people, that actually, get them to behave in a way that is acceptable in society, for example. So in this essence, it is crucial that people start thinking about the ways that we can work with credible voices in order to strengthen our efforts to speak out against the narratives of violent extremism. And also, a related UN Security Council resolution is 2419. It is not directly on terrorism, but it speaks about the need to give, youth a voice and a direct role in preventing and resolving conflict, including when it comes to negotiations and implementing peace agreements, and to take into account the meaningful participation and views of youth. In essence, what I believe it is trying to say is stop treating youth as just merely beneficiaries of those who have to be helped. Youth are now a group that we need to engage with, understand, and partner with in order to understand what resonates with them, so that we can more effectively message against the narratives of violent extremists. And this has been recognized at the international level with this resolution, and a lot of efforts are now being taken to elevate and empower youth when it comes to preventing and countering violent extremism all over the world. And this is something that we must seriously consider. Because at the end of the day, because we have to think that in a sense, the messenger is sometimes the message. Who is saying something is equally important as what is being said. Just because that we think that something is important doesn't mean that the message will resonate, doesn't mean that the message will get through. We have to find credible voices whose voice resonates among the target audience in order to truly get the message across. And authentic, homegrown messages that resonate and connect with audiences is the key here. Working with youth, for example, with civil society, grassroots leaders, are the way in which we can get them to take different roles to forward the interests of preventing and countering violent extremism. Now, I've sometimes mentioned a lot of this in my previous presentations, but at the end of the day, there is a problem with passion, because terrorist messaging vastly outstrips efforts to counter them. That is what we learned early with the establishment of my division last time, the Strategic Communications Division. We were tasked with messaging against violent extremist messaging. But we found out in the first 2-3 months of our establishment that it is not going to be possible to counter them ourselves. We must reach out, because the problem is what a friend of mine from the Radical Middle Way based in the UK was saying, is the asymmetry of passion. Asymmetry of passion is that on the side of the violent extremists, on the side of the terrorists, you have people who are very passionate, who will work 24/7, sometimes without even thought of being compensated for their actions, but they are working towards forwarding something that they believe in. But on the other side, on those who are countering, there may be passionate people, like for example for myself, but we are constrained by the fact that we have families, we work in 9-to-5 jobs, for example. Sometimes, as passionate as we can be, it is limited in a way. And it's very difficult sometimes to find enough people, for example, in government, in organizations like that, to take up this, how would you say, role of messaging against violent extremists. And so it is very crucial to mobilize youth and harness the creativity and generational knowledge that resides within them. One of the ways that we can do that is we learn from the strategy of the violent extremists themselves to outsource the narrative creation, to find people who can message on behalf of us, to provide them, to empower them with the skills they need to message effectively and to close the gap. Now, admittedly, it's difficult to galvanize passion from the ground up. How do you create passion is something that I think a lot of people are wondering about, but is finding very few solutions that can actually address this problem. So many communities, we have to think that many of communities of passion already exist, and raising awareness about the issues concerning violent extremism among these communities and aligning our interests together may be the key. So finding these communities of passion, for example, last time we did a content creators workshop in my old organization, and we decided to fund some contests among comic artists to get them to message against violent extremism. And comic artists are by and large a very passionate group of people. So we were very successful in coming up with some of this messaging in the form of comics. Now, there are, how would you say, guides and, how would you say, books that teaches us how to put out effective PCVE campaigns. And these are some examples of them. For example, the Counter Narrative Handbook gives you an example, gives you a guide towards how to come up with some of these campaigns. The document that is published by Hidayah, the center one, we actually help with the translation. At SEARCCT, we help translated it in Malay, but it is specifically for the Southeast Asian context. When you want to look at the issues that really resonate in Southeast Asia, this book gives you an idea of what can be done. And then there are guidebooks, for example, like Terrorism and the Media that was published by UNESCO that talks about the issues that the media should be aware of when discussing terrorism and violent extremism. Now, just a little bit about how we've been doing things here at SEARCCT, all right? Now, I know that some of our participants are actually from Iman. I saw Dina just now. This was based on an event that we participated. I think it was sponsored by YouTube, that looked upon the various actors and what they did to prevent and counter violent extremism. So at SEARCCT themselves, here itself, our efforts are premised on a number of elements that anticipate how to enhance the effectiveness of messaging. Messaging is important, but how do you enhance it? All right, how do you get the message across? So the importance of addressing ideational and non-material aspects is crucial here. All right, we do not want to just message something that is very rational, a rational argument against violent extremism. That's important, but you must also address certain things like the emotional aspects, the rhetorical aspects of getting the message across. And messaging success is contingent upon a number of factors, which includes authenticity and relatability, something that requires us to work with others, because producing authenticity in itself is not easy, and for government agencies it might be very challenging to generate something that is very relatable. So messaging here, if there is one thing that you come away from this, I want it to be this thing, that messaging cannot be done alone. To be effective, it requires partners from a diverse range of backgrounds who knows and understand the context and the target audience well. You cannot do this messaging alone. If there is one thing that you come away from this presentation, I hope this will be it. All right. So there are a number of activities that we have been involved with, all right, in order to reach out in our efforts to prevent and counter violent extremist narratives. One of it is empowering youth. Now, we've held several workshops. From 2017, we had the Student Leaders Against Youth Extremism and Radicalization, the Slayers. So then we had Tapestry in 2016. We always premise this on the idea of, in the beginning, we give them an idea of what terrorism is all about, what terrorists are doing, and the ideas behind the actions of terrorists and the motivations, and also the ideas of how can we counter some of this. So that usually takes place within the first day of the workshop. We have workshops for 2-3 days, for example. And then the second day, we would empower them with actual skills. For example, for our Tapestry, we tried to teach young people how to use their mobile phone videos in order to make effective video products that prevents and counters violent extremism. So for our Tapestry event, I wish I could show some of this here, but I do not want to overly strain the streaming servers. But they came up with some interesting and innovative messages that we think would actually resonate quite well with young people. The event that you see here is an initiative that we had with inviting young Muslim leaders, all right, in order to, because one of the things that we are very concerned about in SEARCCT is that because we are from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, how would you say, dealing with issues concerning religion is not something actually within our purview. So we wanted to reach out to those with the expertise and knowledge and also the concerns. So we invited, how would you say, educators with a religious background, as well as students who might be interested in messaging against violent extremism in order to tap into their ideas. Because again, we cannot do this alone. We do not presume to know everything, so we have to reach out and work with others. Now, this is one of our more prouder achievements, actually. Here is an example of working with other agencies and departments. In this one, it's called the 3R project, the radicalization, rehabilitation, and reintegration project, if I'm not mistaken, is a project that we did with the prisons department in Malaysia, in which we work to interview some former detainees as well as some current detainees, as well as their family members, as well as the officers within the prisons themselves, in order to get a fuller picture of what happens, the motivations behind those who join violent extremist groups. Because one of the things that we found out when we were giving talks across in various instances talking about violent extremism, we are often confronted with the fact that, sir, you always work in the desk, you look at articles. How do we know you know what you're talking about? We want to hear from the horse's mouth. So what we did for this project, we wanted to show this is the experiences of those who have actually been involved. So with the kindness of the prisons department, we were so happy that we were able to actually interview those in Malaysia that were caught for terrorism offenses and look into why they were doing it, to ask them about their motivations. Even the second picture is an interview with the family members to demonstrate the kind of suffering that these people inflict upon their family members when they join violent extremist groups, the kind of social problems that come about because they join, that would how they inflict on their family. All right, so that's our work with other agencies and departments. And then we also found ways to team up with traditional media. Now, we are a division that works a lot with social media, but we shouldn't really forget the effectiveness in some segments of our population of the traditional media. So here, we worked with Surya Radio, right, a very popular radio station in Malaysia, in order to come up with some webisodes. It's a little tricky because webisodes are not really traditional media, but the webisodes themselves were promoted on traditional media. So it reached a certain segment of the population that weren't usually accessible through purely through digital media, social media. So one of the interesting things about this collaboration is that Surya FM actually told us that their listenership during this period actually increased when they started running this campaign. So this is a collaboration at its best, we think, when our partners benefit as much from the collaboration as we did. So we were very happy with this collaboration with Surya FM. We produced a total of 8 webisodes to talk about things such as how gamers can be influenced into joining violent extremism, as this webisode was about, and also about the dynamics, family dynamics of angry young men, for example, who ended up joining violent extremist groups. So those were some of the things that we explored with traditional media. And we also have, again, carrying over from my previous interest, we had a collaboration with comic artists. Here, again, the idea is to get young people, young comic artists who know their field, because we, as a government organization, we don't know what actually excites young people when it comes to comic. Comic is such a visual form that young people would be very interested. It is a dense form where a lot of information is packed into a very few pages, but you can effectively get certain messages across where simple text cannot. So this is one of our other collaborations that we did. And we also like to leverage on influencers. Okay, for the record, these influencers on the left, let me see, that's Aiman Azlan, and on the right is a traditional musician, Alina Murang. They actually help promote some of our, how would you say, campaign, but not directly. We didn't approach them directly. We worked with a media company in order to explore ways in which we can attract the attention of young people. And they came up with certain, how would you say, public service messages. that were very effective. And part of that is a hashtag that they used that caught the attention of young influencers. So by working with media professionals who knew the landscape of their industry, we were able to attract the interest of young social media influencers and able to push out our messages further than we would have been able to on our own. Also, we have to remember that the private sector is interested also in matters pertaining to preventing and countering violent extremism. For example, YouTube has this Creators for Change program in which they get young creators in order to create YouTube videos about things that they cared about. And one of our, videos were actually, one of the videos that we promoted actually came from up and coming YouTube personality. So we were happy to work out with YouTube, who were able to connect us with some of these young influencers. And the private sector, I think, has the ability to empower them in a way that we cannot ourselves. So it is very important to see ways in which we can tap into the expertise that the private sector can provide. And one of the things that we have to emphasize is that you have to build sustainable relationship with the partners that you engage with. There is a tendency sometimes to just create one-off projects in which we work with a particular group, and then for the next campaign that we have, we work with others. Now, it takes a long time for us to build, to raise awareness, to build their expertise, to empower them. So sometimes you would like to look at how you can actually sustain your engagement with particular partners for an extended period of time in order to not let things go to, a lot of time go to waste, rebuilding the kind of knowledge that we're trying to, the kind of awareness that we were trying to build among some of our partners. So it is very important. Here we have the YouTube, personality, Vikar, and we also have up and coming rapper over there that we occasionally work with. So we put them in several projects, not just one. So we try to sustain that kind of relationship and build it in what we are trying to do. All right. So this is a friendly plug. If you are interested in looking at some of the products that I mentioned, they can be found at our Facebook page at My Malaysia Aman. There's a double A in the middle there, My Malaysia Aman, all right? And we have a extensive list of all the products that we have come out with that you can actually refer to at the page. Now, as I often mention, there are various roles that can be played by various sectors. The important part is to find actors with credible voices that can resonate. So for this, you may want to look at non-traditional actors such as grassroots leaders, civil society groups, and youth activists. You know, they can be leveraged to produce sophisticated and culturally nuanced messaging. But then we can also look at the private sector, as I mentioned, to provide the kind of expertise and technical know-how and training to empower these voices to maximize their reach and effectiveness of the messaging. And what government agencies like ours can do is we can help link up these diverse actors and provide them the necessary resources to initiate and sustain certain messaging efforts. And also, for example, in Malaysia, the issue of terrorism and violent extremism is not well understood by the public. So the government has a role also to raise the kind of awareness, particularly with these voices, so that they can effectively voice these concerns through their own channels. All right. Now, what is important here, I always like to end it with this, is that the idea of takes a network to defeat a network. We want these various actors to retain autonomy, to be thinking about themselves, because that is where their value comes from, when they tap into resources that they have, rather than rely on the directions of others. But then you bring them together to work on common goals, but you work at it together by building mutual trust among each other. And that is how I think that we should consider our engagement and partnering up when it comes to preventing and countering violent extremism. I think I'll end my talk here. Thank you.